We've somehow managed to make it an hour without doing Web3 and what you're up to today. So you now have a new company in the broader ad tech Web3 world.
So you've caught me unprepared because yes, a round has mostly closed, but I actually haven't publicly announced it. So I guess this is the official.
Yeah, good.
This is
you went on Rogan, then you came on here. Equally big platforms, podcasts. I know you were debating which one to launch the company on, but
yeah, no, clearly that. But I obviously chose Logan for
yeah, exactly.
Yep.
However much you can talk about, or you're talking about the company specifically, or what led you into Web3. You obviously have a pretty good understanding of how the Web2 world works, at least these social media giants. And you guys, the two of you have had some, I think, either good sport or snippy, depending on people's view back and forth about some of this stuff. So what led you down the path to it, and what do you kind of believe about Web3?
Yeah, so I was not an early crypto adopter. I think like everyone in Web3, there's like the one that got away. There was like a super crypto bull at Facebook when I was there, and he like told me to buy Bitcoin. I think when it was like at $10 or something. And I remember at the time, Coinbase limited your purchases to like $100 or something. And so and I just didn't want to deal with the hassle of like buying Bitcoin. And so I didn't buy as much as I should have. So there's definitely a little bit of a FOMO feel around.
You wait long enough though, it could be back. You could get another $10 opportunity.
The market will fluctuate, as you say. But no, I guess I got kind of sort of crypto pilled by some big names and VCs in crypto today that I just know more personally than anything else. And they got me thinking about it. And I basically asked myself two questions. One, what in Web 2 could actually be defensively rebuilt along sort of crypto blockchain lines? Like starting from zero, what would you rebuild along those lines? And then two, looking at Web 3, what is completely and totally missing from this world that should exist? And the answer to both questions was the same, which is attribution, which if you're not familiar, I know it sounds very wonky and almost academic. It's a technology that more or less gets telemetry from the user touch points, like the ad click, the ad view, you installed the app, you did this thing in the app, you didn't do this thing in the app, you disappeared. And you sort of thread it together into a causal chain out of the chaos of data that's hitting you. And you figure out, it turns out, because, life on the internet is complicated. You see a YouTube video and you see an 8 Sleep ad, because I just see 8 Sleep ads all the time, right? You read an interview with Matteo about it, and then at some point you buy the damn thing. And so it's like, okay, phenomenologically, how did causally I get to the point where I bought this like cooled mattress thing? It's like, well, was it the video? Was it this? Was it the billboard? Was it something else? And so attribution is what helps you solve that problem. And if you look at attribution platforms like my former employer, Branch, or other ones like AppFlyer, Adjust, whatever, it's got competitors. They effectively function as kind of, semi-public, somewhat decentralized ledgers, right? They're a central point. They're sort of a database that says, well, you know what? This got 4 impression views on Facebook and 5 video views on YouTube and this other thing, and then this other thing happened, and this is how we think the causal chain held together, at least in theory. In actual practice, it's a lot less subtle and complex than that for a bunch of reasons that are probably not worth going into here. But that's what I thought was kind of interesting. And so it's probably no secret. I've been publishing on Substack about Web3 ideas and attribution and what would an ad stack on Web3 look like? Well, big reveal, that's actually what we're working on. So those two posts are basically the VC pitch that I raised on in essay form.
Is the idea as like people's Web3 interactions, if you will, happen on like different chains and different platforms, and like how do you find the same human, or what we believe might be the same human across these? Is that the kind of like the general theme?
That's one of the challenges. I mean, identity is fragmented on Web3. I mean, it is on Web2 as well. When we started Facebook Exchange, we discovered that every Facebook user ID had an average of 4 devices. And this was like 2013. It's probably even higher now. And so identity is very fragmented, which makes attribution and targeting very difficult. So that's definitely one of the challenges, Zach. But more broadly, like, let's just think about what's a basic question a Web3 company would ask themselves, right? Like, Web3 already has ads, by the way, if you define ads loosely enough. So like an NFT.
Well, the first thing I would probably ask myself is, what am I doing here? And is anyone actually going to buy this? But after I get through that question, I convince myself there's something here. Go on.
Okay, but what's question number 2 or 3? Question number 2 or 3 would be, what's my retention rate? What is the ROI on that token drop that I just did, right? Or that liquidity, providing bonus that I gave you for, injecting liquidity into my decentralized exchange, right? What is the ROI on that? What are my CACs? Let's say I have a conventional Web2 ads buy for some Web3 game. What was the acquisition cost? What was the long-term, what was the actual long-term monetization? You can't answer those questions right now with the tooling there is no tooling basically in Web3. And so the most basic metrics are basically unanswerable questions right now.
Is that because you show an ad in, I hate the term web 2 because it's really like the web. You show an ad on the web and then somebody comes and has like an interaction in the app, the decentralized game, let's call it as the example. It's a good one. Like I've got to link those two events, if you will, like the history of the events together and do some sort of like data science-y work on I did A, did B, that's the theme.
Yeah, there's a total identity. You mentioned ATT earlier, right? The example of Apple basically turning off the device ID for third-party advertisers on the iPhone. Why does that matter? Well, identity is the primary key that everyone in this kind of fragmented right ecosystem use to refer to each other to calculate things like ROIs, right? And if that doesn't exist or that's fragmented, then it's very difficult to do that. And this isn't by design, it's two different forms of the web interacting with each other. How do you sync that Facebook, campaign ID or that web browser cookie with the wallet that 2 months later actually bought the NFT? There's no way to actually systematically join that.
I cannot believe I'm going to say this out loud, but that's actually like a pretty good startup idea. Like,
there's space in the round. There's space in the round. We'll let in a little friends and family check. I'd be proud to have the biggest Web3 troll in the round.
Well, let me tell
ultimate victory.
Let me tell you why I like it. Because everybody always thinks I hate everything, and it's like I don't hate everything because I hate it. Like I am a startup person. All I do is actually like put money in high risk technology stuff. Like if anything, I'm probably like one of the people who likes these kind of like cockamamie ideas more than anyone else. I just don't like when they're not based in logic and reality and like human behavior. But here, what you've got, which I agree with, like with one giant caveat, is like common advertising and usage metrics and dashboards for a company that operates in Web3, because like the underlying data that they have in their normal web environment is different, right? It's a different set of like interaction points. The way the data is captured is different. The way you have to do analytics on it is different. And most of these companies are too busy trying to figure out a business model to actually do the underlying like analytics work themselves. And so there's your gap. I think that's right. Like it makes a ton of sense because it's not our frame at Operator when we do investing in technology in crypto, whatever, is like, does this make sense as an enterprise software company? And it has nothing to do with like web, would this be an enterprise software that a company would buy? And it does make sense to me that a Web3 customer would pay for this because they are unlikely to be able to build this internally unless they were really, really big.
That's exactly right, Zach.
Yeah.
And I think it's well timed, right? Because crypto winter has shown us that token does not always go up. And a lot of these products were actually sort of Ponzi schemes or speculative vehicles. Yeah. But and again, who cares about your CAC if money is free and token always go up? But when suddenly token doesn't always go up, you have to worry about acquisition costs and unit economics. Yeah. And so this is an engine to actually measure that and hopefully create like an actual legit user acquisition machine for.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a ton of sense. Obviously, my main concern with the whole business is like, do you have customers in 5 years? Because the vast majority of them do feel like Ponzi schemes are race to the. It's not even. I hate the term Ponzi scheme because it always makes you sound like Mel Gibson in Conspiracy or whoever. Was it Mel? I think it was Mel Gibson who was in. Who was the guy who was in Conspiracy who ended up being right? Not a movie. Anyway, like you always sound crazy when you say Ponzi scheme, but in reality, I think of it more as like, is there a fundamental underlying business model that has like long-term sustainable value? And I think actually one of the really fascinating questions for a lot of these Web3 customers is this whole idea of like, are my users actually my users, right? Are they here for the early access to the coin and they jump? How long do they stay? Are they actually just like in the Philippines, basically like skipping from game to game to be able to be the early ones in action? Yeah, there's a lot of like fundamental user metric questions that I think don't have the typical like web oriented analytics, like because you're used to users who show up because they want to buy the product as opposed to users who show up because they want to speculate on the money.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's one of the lessons from the play to earn model, right? If the game isn't actually worth playing, then people are just sticking around for the money.
Shocking. You're telling me if you build a product that people don't actually like to use, it doesn't work. That's so weird. In the long run, it just goes to zero.
I mean, the weird thing here is that if you think about Web 2 and Web 3, right, the reason why it's so mind bending is that so many things about Web 3 are like literally the reverse of Web 2, right? So like Web 2, you would find some viral consumer use case that took off like fucking crazy, and then you'd have to scale infrastructure really quickly and find a business model that actually paid for it, right? Like as late as like literally at the IPO at Facebook, the ad system at Facebook still kind of sucked, right? And the CPMs that we were driving did not justify the valuation at all, right? And the only reason some, little dinky product manager like me could raise his hand and say, hey, we should build a real-time bidded exchange is because everyone was so desperate to drive revenue that they're like, we'll try anything. Here's 3 engineers, build it. You've got a year to scale it to $1 billion.
But you knew that business model was coming, right? Because we've known that we can monetize eyeballs since we invented the newspaper, basically. I mean, we didn't know exactly how we were going to monetize the eyeballs. That I understand and I totally agree with. But this idea of like, you have people's attention in a consistent way, you know something about them, like, yeah, you're going to be able to show them ads. Now, is it going to be worth whatever the like average revenue per user Facebook has today? Like, no, I think everybody got that wrong, myself included. You just assumed it was going to look something like a display ad, and it turns out it's worth way, way more than that. But the simpleness of it, of I show an ad to somebody while I have their attention, that I think people understood. I just don't think they understood the magnitude of it.
Maybe. Look, I mean, the CPMs when I joined Facebook were 17 cents.
Wow.
And so
and what are they now? Just order of magnitude?
It's dollars, probably. In the US, it's several dollars. Probably.
Yeah.
Which is high. But just to contextualize a little bit, Zach, I spent a year, I was basically given a mandate. You own the targeting system, take user data and turn it into money. And we literally took every piece of Facebook-owned user data, getting back to the microphone question, right? And none of it really moved the needle, at least used in a very direct way of like, oh, target a link a user shared, and like shit, like the most simplistic low-level stuff just did not work. It did not increase monetization at all. And so after a year of that, we were like tearing our hair out and not understanding what. And of course, the key was, I think kind of maybe where you're hinting at, which is it turns out the first-party data from REI or Home Depot or Victoria's Secret or Sephora, that's the valuable stuff that'll. And then also, just remember, Facebook ads used to be that little shitty postage stamp size thing on the right. Like newsfeed ads were already like a risky, edgy thing that Zuck might have said no to, right? And once you had the targeting, once you had the media experience, then yes, then now we're at the ARPUs we have today. But it seemed a little, I mean, dude, even scaling, just to nerd out ad tech wise for a second. Again, we're running this exchange. Like you said, there was so much hubbub around it. And I bring in like everyone in ad tech, everyone that ran every DSP, everything. And they'd come in expecting it would be this massive, like showed up with their entire teams, 15 people, and it would be like me. And I take them to the thing and it's like, all right, you see these fucking 3 boneheads right here? This is it. This is the real-time media team at Facebook. And they're like, no, you're joking. Where's the real team? It's like, no. This is it, bro. This is it. This is where you're working with. And so, that's how dicey it was at the time. And the adoption friction was enormous. Just changing, now everyone talks about native ad formats. At the time, that was kind of unheard of. If it wasn't a 300 by 250 pixel thing or a 728 by 90, they're like, get the fuck out of here. We're not going to, And so you could not convince them to spend money on Facebook, even with the CPMs on the floor with 1 billion users. It was a hard sell.
So since I'm always supposed to be the skeptic, I think that's supposed to be my job, right? I'll ask you what I would ask if you were pitching me this business, because I understand the like fundamental thesis of, is there a customer problem? Like, yes. Which customer segment do you start in? Because you have to believe that customer segment ultimately is big enough to support the underlying business, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean,
if we don't get a Larone clip out of this,
oh God,
we've already got it. It's me going like, oh yeah, it's actually like a decent web business.
He's
not going to run that. He's not going to run that. It's not negative enough.
Fair.
Well, the Web3 world, it's weird, right? If you look at this scaled in quotes, I mean, not scaled by Web2 standards, but whatever, some level of consumer adoption, whether it be NFT marketplaces, whether it be exchanges, whether it be Web3 gaming, right? They're all kind of very different, right? The users are very different. If you just think about like, again, to nerd out ad tech wise for a second, Zach, how do you define a conversion event? in an exchange that's trying to like get you to provide liquidity, or even better, let's say you're an L2 like Optimism. They had a token drop that made a bunch of, created a lot of fuss about a month and a half ago. And I've talked to them and like, what are you trying to drive, right? And it's like, well, trying to drive adoption of the platform, right? Like, how do you bake that into an attribution system? It's very difficult. It's very different. The world that you and I know or knew, that you used to know, right? Which is like, oh, a gamer comes in, they spend $100 on a purple tractor, done. It's a discrete event, $100, and then compared to the CAC, and that's my ROI. How do you work that into an exchange model in which, well, I don't know. They provided $1 million of liquidity. Here's this super fucking complicated payoff diagram for how we're going to give a bonus to the liquidity. How do you actually bake that into any sort of optimization?
Right, because you don't know why the user is there.
Right. That's
what?
Right.
How? Which is, by the way, like, that's just like such a ridiculous. Like, I've got,
no, hold on.
Showing up, I don't know why they're. I don't know if they really are here because of like the thing I build, or if they're really here because I'm handing out free money.
Well, hold on. In the exchange case, it's very obvious, and it's no different than liquidity providers in any other exchange, right? It's just the exchanges. We don't need to get into the details. The exchanges work differently in Web3 than they do in pork bellies. But at the end of the day, it's automated market making. They're providing liquidity to a pool, and they're getting paid for that liquidity.
100%. The exchange is like the world's best. I mean, if I could start a crypto exchange and like have it be, I would have started it myself. It's an unbelievable business. It's a speculation tax. It's like definitionally going to work. Because humans like to speculate, and then when you tax the speculation, I agree. Like supporting the exchanges, the exchanges will be here the longest, for sure, right? Because it's like the most fundamental business model in Web3. I was thinking more of like once you get outside of FTX and whatever 900 other exchanges there are that haven't run away with people's money yet, like which next customer segment,
Well, I mean, again, I think Web3 gaming will probably wake up and actually realize they have to make, like, this is like a broader statement about crypto. And it's funny that Laron's probably going to clip this because I'm being negative about crypto. I'm not really being negative, but it's like, and I think Web3 has gotten the memo because you see the chatter on Twitter that it's like, I mean, early adopters do crypto because they get into coins, because they identify with it. They all nerd out about that. I don't think your average user is going to use Web3 because it's Web3. They're going to use Web3 to do cool shit that only Web3 can enable. So build things that do cool shit in which the whole crypto side of it is like incidental to the user, right? And hopefully Web3 goes in that direction. And again, if so, the data backend is just fundamentally different than Web2. And so you're going to need an attribution system that's fundamentally different. And so we're betting on Web3 waking up, token no longer goes up. You have to build products that are actually compelling to real users who actually want to pay money to use them in some form or another. And so we want to enable that user acquisition machinery in some form or another.
I'm just going to say this back because I'm getting Rashad in the chat. I think you guys went quickly to the deep ad tech nerding out thing, but basically there's a whole bunch of events that exist in the Web3 world, be it token drops, be it, I don't know, whatever else, Discord communities, be it, there's probably a bunch of them that you can name that I try to ignore. And all of those things have some level of attribution to whatever action ultimately gets taken, right? And that could be signing up on FTX, that could be buying the NFT on OpenSea, that could be joining the Discord server. Do I have that right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay. And one question I have on this is, and this is just out of my own curiosity, to what extent do you think the acquisition channels are mostly going to be self-contained within the Web3 ones that I just said versus exist in Web2 the same way that, whatever, you need a link back to the terrible Twitter ad that existed in feed. Do you think those end up staying distinct? Do you think you need to bridge the gap between the two?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's one that I often ask myself. Like, as a random note, like, I've talked to some people who are working in Web3 and they're like cooking up ad schemes. And it's like, dude, where are you going to run the ad, right? Like there isn't enough Web3 inventory to actually run the ad.
It has to start. If anything is to break through into a normal human use case, you have to find normal human people where they spend time. And that is in like normal places. Like it just has to happen that way. There's no other way.
Right. And then, even looking forward 3 to 5 years from now, Web2 and Web3 are going to coexist, right? So you have to have some way to bridge those two worlds. And it, whether it's as basic as like, oh, I ran a Facebook user acquisition campaign for my Web3 game and I have to bridge those two divides and calculate what are my Facebook CACs, right? Like you can't calculate CACs in Web3. What the fuck, right? Like we have tooling for this. These are solved problems in Web2. This shouldn't be like an open question in Web3.
Well, part of the reason you can't calculate it is the first C in the CAC is a questionable item here of like, is this a customer? I actually think that's really one of the biggest challenges, which is like, because of the ability for a speculative user to make money very quickly, or theoretically make money, or now potentially lose money very quickly, but in some way like have money involved early in the cycle. That's maybe the better way of saying it. Which of those people stick around at all and which of them don't? It reminds me so much of like, do you remember like the Blue Aprons and Hello Freshes and all those of the world where
Yep.
You're looking at these top line revenue growth numbers of these companies early on. You're like, holy shit, everybody's going to order food and cook it at home through this like frozen meal mechanism. And the numbers look incredible. And then what you don't realize is that like 85 to 90%, it's probably higher than this now, of those users showing up because you gave them like $40 of free food. Right. And then the minute the like $40 of free food ends, they churn. And so you have these metrics internally that look good, but are actually just mostly like cash burning money machines. And it's like, how do you tease out who's going to be the user that actually wants to do Blue Apron over the long run? All 5 of them. And then like, who wants to do, who's really there for the free food? That actually kind of in a sense is like very similar. Like who's here for the free food and who actually wants the product.
But just the side of parallel, it's an excellent point, Zach, but the side of parallel, right? In Web 2, you drafted along on one form of speculative capital called venture capital. And in Web 3, you kind of mosey along on another form of speculative capital, which is just like speculative retail investors and hodlers and whatnot.
Well, I wouldn't make the comparison. Like in the first one, it's marketing dollars. Everybody has to spend marketing dollars to try to accumulate users, whatever it is your underlying business is. I don't know if it's like speculative per se. It's like, theoretically, it's an investment in a long-term user that pays you back more money than you spent getting them. The challenge is like, the pays you back more money than you spent getting them over time. Like, what is the thing that ultimately keeps them there and keeps them excited? And is it useful? I think it's very core. It's really like a business is not that complicated. It's like I make something for X dollars and I sell it for hopefully more than X dollars minus like all the little overhead that I have to actually do the work. That's kind of it, and it's like, the question is, are those people really showing up and consistent over the long run outside of the trading and the exchanges? And
the interesting part, I guess, of how you can be potentially big without it needing to be totally self-contained to the FTXs or whatever, the Web3 first or only quote unquote type people, is if there's a world in which these Discord servers and token drops and all of this stuff ends up feeding into, in the same way that Walmart ultimately became a website as well, right? Went from a retail store to a website. I don't think that it's going to be a major part of a big market, right, for all these other people. But if there is some loyalty program, and again, all this stuff has existed, right, like in perpetuity. But if there's some semblance of a attribution, even if you don't end up taking over all of Walmart's attribution system, if they end up having a Discord server and a token or whatever, NFT or something, and you can be the attribution that bridges those two, you almost don't need it to be totally self-contained.
I'll give you a specific example. I thought it'd be interesting, curious to hear your thoughts. Like, all right, what percentage of the people who are users, and we can define that very loosely here, are also users of like 800 other things in crypto? Right? Because those are the mercenaries, right? Like if I could know that the people coming in over here have done this same like little game before 700 times, like theoretically I would want to segment those people out. They're unlikely to be long-term customers, as an example.
Yeah. The negative part of the Venn diagram.
Well, that's already happening. Again, I keep on using Optimism as an example, not for any particular reason other than I think it's an interesting product and they're smart people. And they've posted publicly about it, so you can read their threads about it. When they did their token drop, not only are there ads in Web3, there's already ads fraud. So people create wallets, sign up for the token drop, get the token, sell it for a stable coin, and walk away and never use the product, which obviously totally sucks. That's already going on. But they foiled it. They actually shut down over 10,000 wallets who are trying to do that through the sort of analysis that you just said. Okay, Did this wallet, was it created yesterday? Is it obviously related to this other wallet, which was also created yesterday? And so exactly the same sort of anti-fraud that is done routinely on the Web2 side, it will also start to have to be done on the Web3 side.
Zach, it's similar to one of your only crypto investments in TRM Labs, right? And the Chainalysis, like, keeping people from defrauding you is actually a great use case of Web3.
Well, I think the biggest, like one of the most interesting use cases in Web3 is this like macro analysis of like, what the fuck is going on here, right? It's really hard. It's like really easy to create a new wallet and spin up a different, move money between chains and move money between different coins and like do a lot of things in a pseudo privacy compliant way, where you're not 100% sure that that's the same person. You can have multiple accounts for the same person very quickly. It's very low and so like these are the problems I think are most interesting to tackle because whether you're a government, which is why I think like TRM and these other ones are interesting, like law enforcement, police, things like that, or theoretically you're an advertiser or an Web3 company that hasn't run out of money yet, you kind of want to know what's going on. There's so much noise. Like it's inherently a noisy system because of the speculative nature of it. That's the problem. It's challenging.
Also, the way the data is structured in the blockchain, I mean, doesn't make it easy to actually construct user profiles. It's not a data structure that's designed to run the sort of tasks that you're talking about.
It's like the world's worst data structure, to be very clear. Like, if you want anything that's like performant in any way, shape, or form, it's like a pretty terrible data structure. I get it. It's decentralized sometimes. It's not controlled by any one person sometimes. But like, yes, it's cool, but it's actually kind of a terrible data structure if you want like fast access to information.
Yep.
That you said something earlier. I'm like, you have to fundamentally think about like where the architecture of a blockchain like actually makes this better. And by the way, blockchain meaning like it has to be decentralized for it to be better because a centralized version of this stuff is usually better conceptually in terms of performance. That's where I get hung up on of like, besides Bitcoin, why do I, anyway, you'll have to answer these questions, obviously, as you think about your customer base, because that's what I would be focused on in as an investor is like, all right, what's the first market that we're going to rely on as a stable revenue stream for this new attribution company? Like, who are the customers?
Yeah. I mean, on the decentralized front, right? I think people are getting a little bit more sane about it and less ideological. A company I like, and here's an example of a Web3 consumer use case, although the user numbers are still probably relatively modest. A company called Farcaster. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They just announced a big raise from A16Z. And, on their landing page, they say we're a sufficiently decentralized social media protocol.
Oh, this is the Coinbase guy, right? Dan Romero.
Yep.
Yeah.
What is this crap? What?
Yeah. Be careful.
I can snag you an invite back.
And so many others, like he's feeling himself a little too much. He made it through with his company intact. So now
I'm gonna join this social network for the rebuild my entire social network usage because I want to be able to move between them over time. Is that what this is?
I'm not going to make the case for another company because I might butcher it. And Dan,
I've never heard of it. I just went on the website and like the second line on farcaster.xyz, which I assume is their homepage, is users will always have the freedom to move their social identity between applications.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, I'm going to join this thing because I think at some point it's going to suck so much that I have to leave.
Wait,
like that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, well then take it up with the EU because guess what? Data portability is one of the tenets of the GDPR. All right, I don't tell you.
No, I agree. By the way, like actually, regulatory issues are going to push the centralized social networks to force data portability. I agree.
Then why not bake? Then why not bake the fucking feature into the data architecture to begin with, such that it doesn't have to be regulated?
Because users aren't asking for it. Like they're not making a choice. They're not making a choice about which social network they use based on their ability to get out later. That's just, they're just not. Like, nobody goes like, I'm going to spend my time on like Facebook now that I can move my data to future Facebook that doesn't exist. Human beings don't operate that way. That's not how people think. Like, I know engineers think about data portability because they're thinking about like, what do I want to do in the long run? But doesn't that just like make no sense to you that you're going to choose a social network because at some point you think it sucks so much that you want to move to the next one? Like, you pick a social network because you want to be there.
You're citing one line from their landing page. I mean, you're right that I think that.
Well, there's only 2 lines in the whole landing page. There's only 2.
Well, no, there's a set of docs that you haven't looked at. But in any case, you're right that I don't think a consumer is going to adopt it for that. A normie consumer is not going to adopt it. It's in a closed beta, by the way, so it's not actually
fair.
The collateral isn't actually target. Again, I don't want to speak for this company. It's not my company. So
yeah, no, I know it's not your business. To be clear, I understand that. Yeah.
We'll edit out the name of the company or something here, so that
put it on there. It's Farcaster. It's more like Never User. That's probably the better name. But like, I get that. I'm assuming the idea is like, we're going to build this centralized protocol that other people can build the actual application layer on top of. I'm going to guess that's like the ultimate use case here. At least that's what they're pitching. But it still kind of goes against the initial piece of this of like, I want to be in a social network ecosystem because it's useful to me, not because I care as a user. I care about portability in the long run.
So just to generalize the argument a little bit away from this, again, business that I don't feel comfortable speaking for because it's not my business, I think the functionality you're talking about, to use a little bit of Web3 jargon, is composability, right? And what that means is that you could there's one piece over here that exists on chain that like exists independently of me, and I can build a thing on top of that kind of without asking for permission, as long as you abide by the rules of the sort of protocol, right? And that obviates the need to create, for example, a developer API that would actually expose that functionality directly. It's permissionless in the sense that, well, I can just go and do it, assuming I actually follow the rules and the protocol standard of that protocol. Right?
Yeah. I know, I get it. I just kind of go like, as a PM myself, I mean, I used to do road mapping. I used to do all the like user interviews. I did the spec writing. I did the UX design crap. I did all of it just like you did. And usually the feature of like, hey, our users want to like move their data to some other thing.
Dude, you're obsessing around the wrong fucking thing. You didn't listen to anything I said for the past 2 minutes. The example to cite is not the data portability thing. It's the fact that Twitter shut down its API partners and fucked every power user on Twitter. That was real functionality that did completely fucked up. I don't know why.
But that has nothing to do. That's just like a bad business decision from Twitter. What does that have to do?
Right,
with
but you can't. Right. But you can't make that bad business decision in Web3 because you don't actually control access.
Yeah, but you have to build Twitter first. You have to like have users who want
That's
to
what
be
they're
there.
doing. That's what they're doing.
They're gonna rebuild like one of the most popular social networking platforms in the world because somebody won't be able to remove API access for power users down the road. Like, this isn't just human beings.
You're like a fucking wind-up doll that somebody behind you is just pulling, and you're saying the exact same thing over and over and over again.
Well, because I actually understand how like normal people show up to use software. I get that it's not like how we think about the architecture of it, but at the end of the day, like, people have to make a choice with their time. Right? Like, a human being has to make a choice with their time to use a product, and they don't really care about the underlying architecture.
I agree. As I've said before, they're not going to use it because it's some weird crypto wonkery. They're going to use it because it lets them do cool shit.
What is that cool shit? That's kind of what I guess maybe
I can't sell your product. I can't sell your product that I'm not involved in or associated with. I feel like, again, I've already stepped out beyond the bounds here of like speaking for this company, but I just cited as an example of one interesting use case for social media in Web3. I don't know. They have to take it up with Dan online.
They got to be your customers at some point. I mean, at some point you have to become an expert in these companies because you have to sell to them, right?
I won't comment on that, but I agree with you on that front. Yeah.
Well, that was good.
I mean, yes, just to answer your question in a slightly less mysterious way, because I've talked about it publicly. At some point, I don't know what their business model going forward is going to be, but assuming they actually do run ads or some sort of paid monetization, you're going to have to build an ad system that actually that plays ball with the Web3 that things do things. And I think the bedrock layer for that, part of why, like, you might ask the question again, why do you start with attribution? Because it's kind of nerdy. I mean, it's important plumbing, but it's plumbing. If you look at Web2, that's not how the whole paid media business started. It started with ads and then got to attribution later. I think things are going to be different in Web3, right? And you're going to have to build the base ground truth of attribution. And then you can think about, okay, how do we build ads out of Web3? How do we build the equivalent of in-might media? How do we build the DSP, like where you actually encapsulate the ads by? I want to target this user with this piece of creative and I'm willing to pay this much. How do you build that on the blockchain, right?
No, I think it's a great idea because in a sense, like, you have these Web3 companies who have tons of dollars flowing in, whether it's coming from venture or speculators. They don't really have like fundamentally good product logical thinking because they haven't had to have users, which is like the backwards way to build a business. And so the first thing they're going to go is like, can somebody help me think through like where to spend my marketing dollars and what's most useful and who's actually using it? And in a sense, you act as like a nice, not a tax, I don't mean it in that way, but like you're going to get a little cut of like all the venture dollars that flow into these business. I actually really like the business. I think that's like a clever idea.
Zach, we have just enough room in the round. If you care to contribute, I'd certainly be happy to that conversation.
Well, I have to also then think about the long-term sustainability of the underlying customer base. That's the TAM issue, right? That's what everybody would say. Well, like, I don't know what the TAM is. How many customers are there that are sustainable? Are you selling to like a known segment? Or are you selling to, like a speculative segment? All that other crap. But that's where maybe my investment would fall down. But I think the underlying like logic behind the business does make sense.
I call that a victory.
Victory!
I got everything. I got everything I needed out of this. I got a little bit of spiciness at the end there. I got the.
I am over time. I know it's a startup. I know you just raised money, but over time, you are going to have to defend your customers' underlying business models because they are your customers.
I get that. Message received.
Well, hey. AGM, thanks for coming on. I'm glad we were able to do this. This was fun. Really appreciate you hanging in here and going through a bunch of different stuff with us.
No, thank you, Logan. And Zach, you're so much nicer in person than you are on Twitter, I have to say. There has to be a term. It's like photogenic, but it's like Twittergenic. I don't know what you'd call this exactly, but
I feel like that's someone that has been accused of that themselves, as I have as well. So yeah, just three of us that play assholes online. But
I just like to poke, just like a little bit. But it's funny. Before I realized you were even working in any of the Web3 stuff, and then my opinion of you dropped like 1,000x. I actually I really enjoyed some of the stuff that you posted in particular. I think in general, just this idea of like having a independent set of beliefs that you believe something to be true, regardless of which party or whatever is behind it. Like, there're just not that many people who have those. And I obviously consider myself one of them. So I do appreciate all of that stuff. Like, that's the part that I think is most interesting about personalities who are good writers, right? It's like you can make the case for your point. It doesn't have to be like the Democrats believe this or Republicans believe like that. Part to me is really interesting.
I guess you're probably referring to the tweet that I made recently where like the true test of intellectual integrity is not claiming you're going against the man or the current thing, but rather agreeing with even your political enemies online because you think it's actually true, right? Which
you have a core belief system of things you believe to be true. And like, I always think the most interesting stuff is when you follow somebody on Twitter who posts about, and you can't exactly tell who they'd vote for. I mean, it's a little harder in these today's world where like, you're not 100% sure, like, where do you sit? And those people are the most interesting because clearly they have a point to be made about like an underlying topic as opposed to, they're selling culture wars or whatever bullshit it is. So
as a I hope I'm one of those people. And as a corollary,
for sure.
As a corollary to it, like I always think the perfect tweet is one that's either equally hated or equally loved by both tribes. Like that to me is like the perfect tweet. And no one can actually figure out.
My best satire is always like it gets engagement because some people believe it and some people get that I'm kidding. And it's just like, it's this concentric circle. And then it escapes, by the way. And then people get outraged by it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this.